Welcome to the Book Party Podcast. Join us as we journey into the world of books with Michael T. Prepare to be captivated by engaging interviews, insightful discussions, and fascinating stories. You'll discover new adventures and gain insight into the creative process of the authors themselves as they share their struggles and accomplishments. Now let's hear from Michael T.
This is Michael T., and I thank you for being with us this morning. To all our listeners, I would ask that you go to the bookpartypodcast.com. That's bookpartypodcast.com. Hit the subscribe tab on top, then go down to the icon of your choice where you can find us, one of your favorite platforms, download it, and you can follow us there. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to get the latest information on our upcoming shows. I would like to introduce you to our guest this morning. William Cushing, and his 4 volumes of poetry, A Former Life, Music Speaks, This Just In, and A Little Cage of Bone. He's presently revising a memoir focused on his time serving in the Navy and later on oil tankers before returning to school at 37. Bill, why don't you take it from here and fill in the blanks a bit and, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Anyhow, and obviously thank you for giving me some time here. Yeah, I obviously was very late to writing because I served in the Navy, and then I went on and continued working at shipyards and mostly oil tankers, but also commercial military vessels, that kind of thing. I actually hadn't thought of going into writing. When I first went back to school, I was looking at actually history as a major, but got roped into writing through an English professor I had who liked what I produced and sort of hooked me into it. And that's how I really started as a writer. So now I've just retired after 23 years of teaching college English and have been able to get fairly well published. And like I say, I'm very happy with got the 4 books of poetry out. I will have a short story collection coming out, hopefully by the end of this month, July. And I'm actually going to be working on a couple of other things. I guess I just passed 71, so I'm realizing I'm running out of time, so I've got to get it in gear and get things done. So I've been very busy with the writing more than anything else.
So you're running out of time at 71. Gosh, I hope not running out of time that quick, or I'm going to have a problem. Well, I've got 2 books out. Yeah. Now, I've got 2 out. Number 3's coming here pretty quick, so I got to catch up, I guess.
Yeah.
So, are you self-publishing your books, or are you using an agency? How are you doing this?
I go directly to. Now, there is one. The Music Speaks I self-published because that was actually it won a chapbook contest, and I liked the result of it so much that what I did was I self-published it in a much slicker form, where I put illustrations in to go with the poems. I actually added a couple of pieces that weren't in the original manuscript that went into the contest. But in general, no, I've gone through, like A Former Life was published by Finishing Line. The This Just In and the new book of short stories are both coming out of Cyberwit. And then my last book of poems, which may be my next prose book, is through Southern Arizona Press. So I've gone through the small presses for the most part. I like working with them.
So are you using ghostwriters and such?
God. Oh, no.
You're writing everything yourself.
Yeah, I do the writing, I do the editing. In fact, I've except for input from the publishers, I pretty much design the covers. I like doing that stuff all on my own as much as possible.
Well, now that you're retired, you got a little bit of time, huh?
Yeah, and I've always actually enjoyed that. When I was in school, I was on the student newspapers. I worked in production. I actually made money part-time doing pay stubs production work for smaller magazines where I was locally. I've always kind of enjoyed that aesthetic of designing stuff visually as well as writing it.
That's good. Okay, in your writing or your authorship, let's call it, what was probably your worst author moment? Take us to that point in time, or that point of your worst author moment that you would consider it. Tell us that story.
Probably the worst, although it was certainly productive. But I'm returning to this. My creative thesis was a memoir. My late wife died of cancer, and so I wrote about that for my creative thesis, and wrote a book about our relationship and her and us dealing with the disease. And basically, I was trying to write it from the point of view of, look, this is, if you're the caretaker for a victim of cancer, this is some of the stuff you're going to encounter, some of the things you go through, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and all that. So writing that was a tough job in that, let me put it this way, there was a lot of crying going on while I was writing.
I bet.
It was very productive, and actually I think it helped get me through the grieving process, perhaps sooner than I might have otherwise. So that's probably the toughest writing moment I had. I'll give you another one, though, and I think this is funny. I got my MFA out of Goddard College, which is a small, independent, small college out of Vermont, and very small classes. And when I got there, of course, I was looking at a project of a novel, but then my wife died and I switched it over to the memoir. But I remember as soon as I got there, I was listening to all these people and they're writing, and I'm thinking, God, how did I get in here? I'm a fraud. These guys are all great. They're going to find me out eventually and kick me out of here.
Right.
I would say the worst, though, is just going through that book, which is, I've got it titled Counting Down the Breaths. And like I say, it was dealing with cancer, which was not the most joyous time of my life.
Right. And you were, that'd make it kind of difficult, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
in your writing,
cathartic.
Yeah, in your writing or your authorship, I don't even know if that's a real word. In your writing, take us to a point in time of an incredible epiphany. No matter what you were doing, you had this epiphany moment. The light bulb went off in your head, the big wow, and you had to run to a pen and paper, write it down, or you were maybe typing. I don't know what you were doing. And you had to run to and write this down, like, wow, what was that moment?
That's funny. I'm a big believer in journals, so I'm always keeping them, and I've always got something to write with no matter where I am. Even if I'm going to the post office, if the line is too long, I can jot notes down, that kind of thing. So I think one of the best things I ever heard was Philip Levine came to my college and gave a talk, and somebody asked him, he said, well, where do you find material to write? And his answer was, look out the window. It's all around you. And I really abided by that. As far as a complete piece, I would say the book I'm revising now, which is the memoir, my own personal memoir about my time in the Navy and then afterwards, it was funny. That actually started because I had a woman in my writing group. I facilitate a writing workshop here. And she asked me, she said, well, how does a guy go from being an electrician on ships to being a college English professor? And I said, well, funny you should ask. Let me tell you the story. And then that I said, this is a great idea. So I started writing these stories down about my time in that earlier life, which, by the way, is one of the reasons I called my first book A Former Life, because we all have these different lives we live. But that was really great. When she asked that question, I said, you know what? It's time I set this down on paper.
Okay. So that's how you did that life book, your former life?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So today, this day today, what's the one thing that you're the most fired up about, excited about right now?
Today would have to be, I'm going to get to work. I mentioned a little earlier, I'm going to put together a collection of short creative nonfiction pieces. And actually, it literally is today because I got the email this morning from Southern Arizona Press, who did my last poetry book. And I asked him, are you interested in a prose book at all? And he said, yeah, go ahead, shoot it to me. So I'm going to actually start putting the pieces together, organizing them, that kind of thing, to try and get at least a basic manuscript put together and hopefully get it to him by the end of the month. So I would say that. I do have to also do some of my own work because I've got stuff due tonight that I have to send out by 5 or 6 o'clock our time here. So I need to get to work on that. But yeah, the excitement of a new project is that's always fun for me.
I can imagine that. Again, this is Michael T. Please go to bookpartypodcast.com. That is bookpartypodcast.com. Hit that subscribe tab. Go down and choose your favorite platform where you can follow us. And if you enjoy our show, don't hesitate to leave a review. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter and get the latest information on our upcoming shows. And I'll give a shout out to iHeart Radio Station Kiss Radio. iHeart Radio Station Kiss Radio for having us on their show. Okay, we're in the lightning round, Bill. I have 4 pointed questions for 4 pointed answers. What was holding you back in the beginning before you ever wrote your first book? What was holding you back from becoming an author?
Well, I guess the simple answer is life. I actually, even though, and I spent 15 or 18 years not doing actual pointed writing, I still kept journals, I kept notes, that sort of thing, which actually I like to say, much to the chagrin of my wife, who is very organized and neat and tidy. And luckily, this place we bought has my own little cubby hole where I can stack papers up and keep all the around because I'm convinced it's going to become useful at some point. But probably now, when I was in school, I sent things out. I got published pretty regularly. Probably the biggest thing that put things on hold was our son. I've been married now to this woman for going on 28 years this coming August. But our son, who's now 22, is very disabled, has a lot of multiple disabilities. And so probably for the first 15 years of his life, we were caught up in, therapies and just all kinds of things that just had to be done. And in fact, my wife and I, as soon as he was born and the diagnoses came through, we both decided, okay, we're just going to work part-time. All right, we're giving up extra money, but we got to devote the time to this guy. So I really didn't send anything out again until 2016. So that 14, 15 years in between the year 2000 or 2001 and then 2016, like I say, it was just life. I had this, my priority was my son, and so I had to put everything else on hold for a while, and, perfectly happy to do so. Obviously, I still kept notes and, kept things in the works, so I had material to go back to. But, that was probably the biggest thing that before I actually got serious about publishing, other than sending to magazines and journals and that kind of thing.
Right.
That's when I really started looking at doing book-length work on my own.
Okay. Well, let's see. Let's share one of your personal habits that contributes to your success. And from what you're telling me, I think I already know what that is.
Well, I guess it's just, keeping aware of everything that's going on. I'm really big on that. And like I say, taking notes all the time.
I knew that was what it was going to be.
And I'll write it on a napkin if need be or whatever. I guess the big thing is, and I don't know if I ever heard this, but it's something I always tell students is don't ever trust your memory. You get an idea for something, write it down, and you get back to it later.
We call something a situational awareness.
Yeah.
That's what we call it.
It does give you a lot of ideas. I mean, several of my poems are about people I've just watched and seen. I didn't know them necessarily, I wasn't part of their life. I was like, that's an interesting scenario there. Let me record it.
Right. Well, with time in the military, you see things that other people may not see. That's why we call it situational awareness. So you got a much better cap on what's really going on around you. So you see a lot more things. So you have to write it down because you're right. You don't trust things you don't write down because your memory just doesn't catch it all the time. You got to write it down. You're absolutely correct.
And it's funny. I'm finding that more and more now because I've gone back to the memoir about my wife and my late wife, and revamping it because it was a lie. I did send it to an editor at one point several years ago, and he said, "Look, what you got here is fairly good, but you don't need all of it here. You needed to get it out of your system, but you can cut back on a lot of these characters, on these events." So now what I'm doing is going through and editing it, really working on it. And I find that before we got the diagnosis, I really have to depend on memory. And I know I'm making a lot of it up. Because it's like, well, what were we doing at that time? And that sort of thing. Whereas once she got diagnosed, I was keeping journals and, just writing everything down.
Okay. Maybe you can share one, and this has to do with your writing, one internet resource that you can share with our listeners.
Well, I guess I'd have to say my own. I do have a website, which is online. It's mywriteronline.net. That would probably be the biggest resource. Do you mean as far as my own writing or for anybody's writing?
No, it's for what you draw from, a website or a resource.
What I draw? God, that's
what
good.
You draw from, a website that you use either regularly, occasionally, whatever, a website that you use as a resource for your writing.
Boy, I have to admit that. I mean, obviously sometimes I have to look things up like spelling and details and that sort of thing. So in that case, just go to Google. It usually does a fine job. I don't trust Wikipedia a whole lot, but I'll try and find something that, just for an example, one of the poems I wrote about in my last book was about Caligula. So I needed to go, I had read Graves's book, I, Claudius, which talks about Caligula and knew the basics. But I went through and went to, it's probably history.com, the History Channel's website, to get more background on the guy other than what I'd already heard. So yeah, I'll do, I think I'm good at research. So once I get online, especially, even back before we had the websites, it was never hard for me to nail down information going through a card catalog or, different sources and that kind of thing. So yeah,
right, okay.
I hate to give them such a big plug, but I guess Google is a good source for finding things out.
Is.
You need to be discriminating on where you go to get it, but
right.
Good gateway.
Okay. All right, we're entering the grand finale. So what we want to end up with here is sharing some ways to connect with your books, ways to connect with you about your books, and about maybe to connect with you, whether you got website, whether you got they can follow you, they can maybe email, or other ways to connect, and ways that they can just connect with everything that you've got. And then what we need is just about your books themselves, because we've talked a lot about you, we've mentioned your books, but we need to talk about your books. Okay? So feel free to go.
Well, sure. Obviously, I just said the website, but I'll also send you the link in case you want to post that. But it's mywriteronline.net. It's a semi-business. I do offer editing services and things like that, but it's mostly just to promote my own work more than anything else. And obviously, it has links to the books, where to get them, how to contact me if you want to get a signed copy, or you can. All of my books are available through Amazon, and most of them are available through the publishers themselves. But yeah, like I say, mywriteronline.net kind of brings it all together, including things like this, interviews I've had, articles that have been written about my stuff, so people can read reviews and get a feel for what those books are about, that kind of thing. I can say that the books that I've already published, which, like I say, are all poetry, obviously that's kind of a special interest market. But I think one of the best reviews I got for my first book was I was trying to sell copies, and a bunch of people I went to high school with helped out and bought copies for me. And I remember one of them posted I don't remember if he posted it on Amazon or not, but I know he put it on the personal Facebook page. He said, "You don't need to be an academic to read his work and understand it," which I thought was a really nice compliment. It's like, in fact, it's funny because when I was in school at Central Florida is where I got my bachelor's, and a lot of my classmates ended up calling me the blue-collar poet because of, I'm not very mysterious. I'm not ambiguous. I'm pretty direct and concrete. And that's what I like to do. Not to say that there aren't references, and sometimes I'll, touch on mythology and that sort of thing. But in general, the stuff I write, I think, is pretty straightforward stuff. As far as the books go, and this is, it's interesting because when I was assembling that first book, A Former Life, I went to a friend of mine I worked with at school, and he had published several books, and he was an editor. And I said, "Well, what advice can you tell me?" And he said, "Look, who's your market? Gear it toward that, and put the information, at least loosely grouped, if not tightly grouped." And so that really worked out well. And so the first book, A Former Life, was, in fact, the subtitle was 2 centuries, 60 years in the making, because that's how old I was at that time, or a little bit older. But yeah, I figured, I went back to when I was 10, so yeah, I figured, all right, 60 years. But that's all organized under people, places, and things. So, the first section is all poems about the people I've known, I've met, here again, personally or otherwise, or just encountered. The second is places I've been, and focuses on that. And then the final, the things, was, somebody asked, how do you come up with things? Well, if it didn't fit in people and places, throw it in there. Music, religion, sports, that kind of thing. So right. Now, Music Speaks, obviously, is all about music. It's a very short chapbook, but it's mostly jazz. That's my big thing. I love jazz music. But there's some, it opens with a classical piece, has some blues and jazz in there, a lot of that, and then some rock stuff. That one I organized chronologically according to the composer or the singer or whatever. So the first one is classical because this is the guy who lived earliest, and then it goes to like, U.B. Blake, and then Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Nina Simone, those people. This Just In was a lot of fun because that was, I had published a lot of ekphrastic stuff, which is when you write a poem based on a visual image. And I really liked some of the work, and so I thought, well, let me put one together that is mostly that, but then also I wanted to get the journalistic part, because actually the subtitle of that book is, Poetic News, Fake or Otherwise. And it's loosely based on a standard newspaper where the news is the first section, commentary tends to be the second, arts and entertainment, sports. So that's kind of, it's kind of a satirical look at media, but also has some pretty, poems based on artwork, which not every poem has a piece of art with it, but quite a few of them do. The last book, the Just a Little Cage of Bone, is, and it says it in the introduction, is, look, I'm past 70 now. I'm looking back at my life, and this is sort of a collection of my images, my impressions, things of that nature. So that one is, here again, loosely based on category, where there's sports, there's religion, there's some more new music stuff, but a lot of it is my family, friends I've known, and here again, even like there's one poem there called 4 Observations of Modern Women. Only one of them, well, no, 2 of them. I could say 2 of them I knew personally, although one of them not greatly. I knew her a little bit, but there's really only one of the women in that poem that I knew on a personal level. And it's pretty obvious who it is because I knew her that well that I could give details about her. But the rest is just, all right, these are women I have seen, encountered in my life, and here's sort of my overall impression of them. So those 4, that's sort of the gist of those 4 books. Like I say, the short story book, which I'm hoping comes out by the end of this month, that's kind of shoehorned. It's between 2 personal experiences, and then there's a mix of personal experience and pure fiction. Short stories, like there's one about making a deal with the devil. There's one about, a post-apocalyptic, not sci-fi, but more of a personal story for the protagonist. And then there's a couple of stories, like one was I was in first grade. There's one that was, there's one on the Trojan War. In fact, there's a couple of stories that connect with military. I'm a veteran myself, so obviously that becomes a big thing in my writing as well. So there's 2 stories in there very directly connected to veterans and their issues, and then one that's kind of peripherally attached to that stuff. So, and then the other books, as they come up, I'll certainly post as I'm getting closer to, them on the website. I'll put notes about, this one, here it is, here's what it's going to be, and, post reviews and that kind of thing. So, that's kind of a summary of the books, though.
Okay, good. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Thanks.
A lot. Okay. Well, again, this is Michael T. Please go to bookpartypodcast.com, bookpartypodcast.com. So go to that subscribe tab up there and go down, choose your favorite platform where you can download and follow us. And if you enjoy our show, don't hesitate to leave a review. Don't forget to sign up on that newsletter to get the latest information on our upcoming shows. William, we thank you so much for being here with us today and opening up to us about to our listeners about your books and series. Book Party Podcast is owned and powered by MTM Legacy Publishing, LLC. What's that, Pete? Or I'm sorry, Bill.
Just saying thank you for giving me the time.
Absolutely. Okay, this is Michael T., and we'll be signing off.
You must not miss our next episode as we delve into a world of inspiration, entertainment, and thought-provoking insights. Join Michael T. on the next Book Party podcast and experience a new adventure, a new story, and a complete immersion into the world of Pages Unveiled, Chronicles of the Writing Journey.